Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Ramona Memories, Tourism and the Shaping of Southern California. And thank you for joining us again here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Blinn House. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to host the program this evening. So for those of you who are new to us, and I'm not sure there's many of you who are new to us, but the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs just like this one on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, book collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, I ask you to consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members and our donors. So if you have a chance, you're not a member, or if you just want to find out more about who we are and what we do, you can visit us online at bccbooks.org. And now, let's get to tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled Ramona Memories, Tourism and the Shaping of Southern California, and our speaker is Dydia DeLyser. Now, I think it's not unfair to say that the Ramona Myth has been a huge part of our speaker's life. Dydia DeLyser began researching the Ramona Myth as an undergraduate at UCLA, and that work led to the publication of her book, Ramona Memories, Tourism and the Shaping of Southern California. Ramona Memories is about how the iconic 19th century novel titled Ramona by Helen Hunt Jackson influenced the way locals and tourists interpreted and experienced Southern California. Ramona, which was originally a novel intended to protest the treatment of Native Americans and Mexican Americans in California, became the romanticized and fictional basis for interpreting California as a place for Euro-American settlers, Mexican Americans, and Native Americans alike. Now, Dydia DeLyser is an author. Did I say Dydia? Dydia DeLyser is an author and an associate professor of geography at California State University, Fullerton. She holds a BA in geography from UCLA and an MA and a PhD in geography with distinction from Syracuse University. This is my favorite part. In addition to her research related to Ramona, her areas of scholarly interest are wide-ranging, and frankly, they're just pretty fascinating. They include how neon signs transformed the American landscape, which she will be doing a program on that for us later this year, how ghost towns in the US are understood by residents and visitors through their landscapes of absence and abandonment, and how women pilots in the late 1920s and early 1930s advanced feminism in the post-suffrage era. Wide-ranging topics, right? Tonight, Dydia will talk about her Ramona-related research, and I'm sure she's going to mention, and I know she's going to share, some of her personal collection of Ramona-related books, tourist souvenirs, and ephemera. So if you have questions for our speaker, please wait until the end of the presentation. We should definitely have time toward the end to take some questions, and also we'll have time for some show and tell up front. So now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dydia DeLyser.
Thank you for an absolutely spectacular introduction. I want to try to talk without the microphone, so I think it's better if I turn it off. The sound quality is kind of meh.
Yeah,
So,
you can just hit the button.
Okay. Until it goes dark. Okay,
Yep.
great. Okay, so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about Ramona. I've been doing it for a really long time. I'm going to share all these books with you that are part of my collection. I have a lot of Ramona junk, and you're going to see some of that stuff in the slides. First, I want to know about you guys. How many people have read the book, Ramona? Okay, good. That's a third, about a third. And okay, so just, how many people own a copy of it, but may or may not have read it? I have lots of books I haven't read. Okay, so there's only a few. Okay, so then we'll dive deeper into the different editions and stuff like that. I'm not a formal book collector myself. I just accumulated a lot of Ramonas, and my husband is also a California history person. So we have a bunch of old books, but we're not collectors per se. All right, so this woman is the most important woman in the history and geography of Southern California. And as you can see, she never lived. She's not a real person. That also means she has not died. So that's Ramona, and that's who I want to talk with you about tonight. A fictional character whose fictional existence has transformed the place where we live and continues, well, to cast her shadow over our lives in really interesting ways. So the novel Ramona, spread out here, as Kevin mentioned, it's Helen Hunt Jackson's 1884 novel. Jackson, pictured there, she was one of the most highly paid writers of her time. She was an experienced travel writer, she was a poet, and before she wrote the novel Ramona, she became completely compelled to right the wrongs done to Native Americans. Her first work on that topic is a book called A Century of Dishonor, where she cataloged the wrongs, the treaties broken by Americans to Native Americans. And that was her thing. She was in the novel Ramona, she was not concerned with the Spanish colonial period or the Mexican colonial period or what those folks did to Native Americans. That was wrong. The term genocide didn't exist yet. She was concerned about what Americans were doing right now to fix the problem that's happening right now. That's what compelled her to write the novel. Her first book, A Century of Dishonor, she mailed a copy to every member of Congress at her own expense. Well, it was one of those ones that sat on the shelf and nobody read. It didn't do anything. So she said, oh, I have this idea. She had this idea for a novel where she would use factual details of real horrors that had been perpetrated against Native Americans and weave those in to a fictional story so that people would be swept up in romance and swept up in her beautiful portrayals of Southern California. And then they would, as she said, she put it, sugarcoat the pill, and they would swallow the pill and realize horrors were being done to Native Americans. We got to fix it. So that was her strategy. She had already traveled extensively in Southern California, and she had worked as a special agent for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to investigate the conditions and needs of the California Mission Indians, and that's work that she also published. So she knew what she was writing about in Southern California, because she'd been all over the place, and she talked to lots of people. But she didn't write the book here. She wrote the book in a flash in the Berkeley Hotel in New York City. The book came out in 1884, and she died of cancer in 1885. Had she lived, probably things would have been different, but we all know that once your work enters the world, you can no longer control it. So she would have done something with her profits, and she would have written more. It certainly would have been different, but it didn't work out that way. So we're going to learn something now about what happened after she was gone. So remember Los Angeles in 1884, Helen Hunt Jackson had been here just a couple years before that. Los Angeles was just about a little bit bigger than a dust speck. It was a tiny town. San Francisco was a big city, but Los Angeles in 1884 was not yet. It was still, the way that Jackson described it in her travel articles for the Century magazine, it was a sleepy Mexican pueblo. So it still had the echoes, as she called them, of the Mexican and Spanish colonial periods. That was in 1884. But in 1885, she's dead, the book is already out there, the second of two railroads, so a competing railroad arrived in Southern California, and there's this huge tourism and real estate boom as rail fares plummet to near zero. And hundreds, and then thousands, and then tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands of people flock into Southern California from the rest of the United States, from the Midwest and primarily and the Northeast. So very quickly, that what had still lingeringly been Mexican colonial and Spanish colonial Los Angeles became American colonial or American Los Angeles. The culture changed, the people changed, the language changed, everything changed really quickly. And all those people who came here, they wanted to know something about where they were coming. Just like we all do when we travel. They wanted to know, what is this place about, where I just bought a train ticket to go see? Well, at that time, there's no internet, there's no TV, there's no movies, right? And Ramona was the first novel written about Southern California. And it was written as historical fiction with real aspects of history known to be woven into it. So people turned en masse to Ramona to understand Southern California because there was compelling, but there also just wasn't anything else to read. In the book, so there's a romance between Ramona and the son of a Native American chief, Alessandro. So there's this romance, and it ends tragically when Alessandro is murdered by a white man, and all the horrible things that happen to them. But in the beginning of the book, it's set on a Mexican colonial rancho in an era of opulence, and Ramona is the sort of Cinderella stepdaughter who lives on the rancho, but everything there is beautiful and wonderful, and the descriptions are just lavish. And if you had just come from the snow in Ohio to read about the orange blossoms blooming in December, it's pretty compelling. So people really, really loved reading the novel, and it really spoke to them. And for those of you who know about books of this period, this was a time when Americans were becoming very interested in what you might call the nooks and crannies of our own country, the little niche cultures that were existing in parts of the country that were not where they were from. So they saw Southern California portrayed in Ramona as very exotic, right? As a very different kind of culture. So they were fascinated by that. So it fit in with not only the theme of a romance novel, but the kind of fiction that people really wanted to read at that time. So much so that very soon after the publication of the book, tourists started to go everywhere and try and figure out, where was this scene set? Where did this happen? Where did that happen? And so guidebooks, that big fat guidebooks that could take you to those places, that could say, no, absolutely, it was not there, it was here. Authoritatively. Remember, it's a fictional work that was created in Helen Hunt Jackson's creative imagination, and the character never lived, but authoritatively, they can tell you all these things that didn't exist. So, for example, there were two ranchos in Southern California that were identified as the home of Ramona. This is Rancho Guajome in San Diego County. You can see it's also called where Helen Hunt Jackson wrote her famous book. No, she didn't write it at Rancho Guajome. She wrote it in New York City in a hotel. That's documented because she had kept diaries. So there's that's not even a thing. But it was a thing back then. But that became the beating heart of the Ramona Myth is Rancho Cumulos in Ventura County. And for those of you who live locally, they're both, Rancho Guajome is a county park, and Rancho Cumulos is a 501c3 nonprofit national landmark, and it's gorgeous. The grounds are magnificent. They're only open on Sundays. Totally worth going. You should absolutely see it. It's just as it was, and it's magnificent. The home of Ramona became what everyone identified. It was so recognizable from reading the book. Like, you could count the number of stairs and like these little tiny details. It's like, oh my God, it's just like on the page. So the people who lived there at that time, the property was still owned by the Del Valle family. These are the people who were granted the land in the Mexican colonial period. So their family still owned the land, and they started getting like tons of tourists coming to their property, and like, where's Ramona's bedroom? And they would invite them over for dinner, to stay for dinner by the thousands over a period of years. So they hosted a lot of Ramona tourists, and that, that was hard on their finances. That's documented. But they also benefited from it a bit. Like, it was a citrus ranch, a citrus farm, so they labeled the produce of their ranch under the Home of Ramona brand, and it was so recognizable. I mean, there were so many postcards of the Home of Ramona. It is, it's unmistakable. So they also benefited from it, and they were very proud of their colonial, their heritage, and how far they went back in California, and Ramona celebrates that. So they felt very connected to that story. They sold the property in 1924, and then a Swiss immigrant, August Rubel, and his wife bought the property, and it was the Rubel family who, a generation later, one of the children, led the effort to turn it into a museum and a landmark and a 501c3 nonprofit. Down in San Diego, this tumble-down adobe that had been lived in by the Estudillo family. It was granted to them in the Spanish colonial period, so it goes way back, but they weren't living in it anymore by 1884, so it was already kind of tumbled down. It was recognized by all the authorities as Ramona's marriage place, because there's a scene in the novel where they get married, and it's not like, well, you notice there's bells. No bells rang in the book, just saying, but people started to flock there, and the significant difference with Ramona's marriage place was it was, unlike the two homes of Ramona, it was a place that could really easily be touristed. So it was purchased in 1906, that's already a few years after the novel, purchased in 1906 by John D. Spreckles, who was a significant developer in San Diego. And he had the property restored, reopened as a tourist attraction in 1910. He ran a trolley line right up there so you could get there. And when they restored it in quotes because they changed it, adding things like a curio shop. I don't have one of those in my house, but I probably could sell some of my Ramona junk. It's still open to the public today. It's part of Old Town State Historic Park. And it's, ever since the 1960s, Ramona's marriage place as a name was stripped from the building, and it was returned to being called the Casa de Estudillo, the home of the Estudillo family, who were granted that property and built the house. It's still known that way today. Then, well, in the novel, Ramona is, the fictional character, is born at Mission San Gabriel. So there's these two places near Mission San Gabriel that are said to be Ramona's birthplace or Ramona's home, because obviously wherever you're born, you live there at least for a minute. And then in 1929, there was this proposal for a Ramona amusement park. Ramona Village in Culver City. The connection with the novel made by the founder was that supposedly this was a spot where Ramona's husband, Alessandro, had tied his horse. It's not in the book. But hey, you can say what you want. Now, we all know what else happened in 1929, right? Ramona Village became Mission Village Auto Court. And it survived. And it survived as an auto court until the construction of the freeway. So it's now underneath the freeway. And all that's left are my Mission Village dish towels. One of the odder souvenirs that I have. Then there's the Ramona pageant. This year celebrating its 100th season. So it started in 1923. This is a spectacular outdoor production in a natural amphitheater. Has anyone seen the pageant? Oh, look at that. It's still going on. The script was radically revised a few years ago. There's not anything left of the original characters, but they still have lots of horses and song and dance and stuff like that. So it's still really compelling because you don't get to see an outdoor pageant very often. And it was very compelling for people in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. There's been, in all this time, there's been Ramona everything. So there's a Ramona song. Has anyone heard it? It's on 78 and 45, and of course you can get it now on CD reissued, and you can stream it. It's piano rolls. Ramona, I hear the mission bells above. Have you heard it? It's a real earworm, but there you go. Anyways, but that song was reissued by so many people all through at least into the 1950s. Like there's a doo-wop version. It's awesome. Multiple versions of the film. Multiple versions of the film, including 4 in English, 1 in Spanish, and a Spanish language Mexican telenovela. Actresses who played Ramona: Loretta Young in the 30s, Dolores Del Rio in the 20s, and in 1910, the very first Ramona was the biggest star of them all, Mary Pickford. And that Ramona is quite short, shot by D.W. Griffith, filmed on location at the home of Ramona, because they could scarcely shoot it without being in the epicenter. And that's the bit, you can find that online, it's out there, it's a short film, and they regularly screen it at Rancho Camulos, which is really neat. But there were all these souvenirs and all this stuff and all these places all over Southern California that were named after Ramona. So there's a doll, and there's the Ramona Candy Company because Ramona was sweet. And there's Ramona Dry Cleaners because Ramona had kept her clothing very nice. Ramona Velveteen Ribbon. The Ramona Pharmacy. In the novel, one of Ramona's children gets sick and dies, so maybe she could have gone there. The Ramona Cafe, of course she cooked for her family. The Ramona Washette, back to her clean clothes. There's no evidence that she smoked or smoked cigars, but they did exist. There's also no evidence that she drank, but that didn't stop them from making Ramona beer or Ramona wine tonic. And that stuff is from Prohibition. But let me say, if my wine was 22% alcohol, wow, I would be feeling it was a universal remedy. There would be some seriously good stuff. Maybe not so tasty. Oh, no. And this is my Ramona pinball machine from just before World War II. It's a really early pinball machine. It's not very fun to play, but it is really fun to play. My husband restored it, and he has the high score. There's Ramona perfume, because I know you want to smell like Ramona, right? We all want to smell like Ramona. And of course, this being Southern California, when we planned our freeways, we named, so now we know we have the Santa Monica Freeway, and which is going to Santa Monica. We have the Foothill Freeway, which runs along the foothills, right? So they're all place or destination oriented, and they always were that way, except for the Ramona and the Alessandro freeways. They were the only freeways that were not named after the place. So the Ramona Freeway is the San Bernardino Freeway, the 10 eastbound out of Los Angeles. So that's the Ramona Freeway. The Alessandro Freeway is the Glendale Freeway, that goes through Echo Park. And if you know that part of Echo Park, there's still the street called Alessandro. That's parallel to the freeway. So you already know the tragedy in the landscape. The two freeways don't meet. They could have done a better job of that. What about all these people? Who are these people who went to the pageant, who went to the home of Ramona and got invited for dinner, who went to Ramona's marriage place? And all these tourists had been written about until I wrote my book, is the short story. Had been written about as basically zombies who were lured like moths to the flame by California boosters who sold them a bill of goods, fake stuff about, it was as if people thought that the readers believed that the character was real. Well, that's a common thing. We often want to think when we see a movie or read a book, what are the real aspects? And when you know that some of them are real, it becomes really even more compelling. So the readers of the book and the tourists who read the book in Southern California or before coming to Southern California were basically portrayed as morons and dupes. And I started collecting all these Ramona souvenirs and so many more you'll see, and started collecting copies of the book with inscriptions and postcards that were with things written home. And I started to see that I could show quite differently that the novel meant something in people's lives, that they wove the novel and their experiences of reading it into their travels in Southern California in meaningful, not superficial ways. So I'll show you how that happens with a case study of Ramona's marriage place in San Diego. So this was the big splash front page on the San Diego Union in 1910, the day that the tourist attraction, Ramona's marriage place, opened to the public, the gala opening day. And it was the biggest tourist attraction in San Diego for decades. So it was a really big place to go. It was very, very popular. And as you can see by this sporty couple, in early automobiles, which was a daring way to travel, you could go there. Notice it's right-hand drive, because we didn't, in 1910, you didn't have to drive on the right side or the left. It didn't matter what side of the car you drove on. It didn't matter what side of the road you drove on. We didn't have that yet. And as I said, John D. Spreckles, who bought it and redeveloped it by hiring Hazelwood Waterman, a really fabulous woman architect, to restore the property. He also ran a trolley line right out there, so you could get right on the trolley or drive your own car and go straight to the curio shop. Look at all that stuff. They had Ramona's marriage place, everything, and they had so much stuff that is so not even in the novel, and it's really a riot. This is one of my favorite. Salt and pepper shakers of cats in top hats, and it says Ramona's marriage place. What's that? That's so great. But other things are meaningful. This is a holy water font. I also have a little case for I'm not Catholic, I can't remember what it's called, for if you're not able to attend Mass and then you can't get the wafer, but that's really important because it's the host, so the priest will bless it, put it in a special case, and then you take it to the sick person who couldn't go to Mass, and they made that in sterling silver Ramona's marriage place theme. Now that is not a superficial souvenir, that is serious business, but you could buy it with the Ramona's marriage place imprint. This is, it's mine now from the collection of my friend Phil Brigandy, who you may know, a California historian who passed away in the pandemic. This was his. It is an ostrich egg. Painted with Ramona's marriage place on it. So ridiculous, it's fabulous. I'm sorry?
There was an ostrich farm?
There was an ostrich farm here,
Yeah.
but not next to Ramona's marriage place. So these are some of my spoons. I have more than 60 different Ramona's Marriage Place silver souvenir teaspoons. There was a huge craze both for postcards and souvenir teaspoons in the late 19th century and early 20th century, but these are all different. Some of them are hand engraved, so they're just made by some guy sitting there. Others are elaborately mass produced. And they're all sterling silver, so they're always expensive. You know, a postcard is, you know, a couple of pennies, but a sterling silver spoon was never cheap. It's a classy souvenir, right? And if I have 60 ones that are completely different, all of those manufacturers are making these expensive spoons. That tells you something about how many people wanted this stuff, this silly spoons, right? So look at them for a minute. So here's a bunch of them. I don't know that these folks visited by car in about 1905, but look at Bia and Meta in their sporty cloche hats from the late 20s and that Speedy, that they're wearing matching speed print coats. So cool. They often tourists would pose with their cars. This was a time, so the first half of the 20th century, this was a time when automobile tourism and tourism in the United States by Americans was transforming who we are and how we understand ourselves. Because we had known for a really long time that Europeans, wealthy Europeans, in order to become well-educated, of course they went to university, but then they would go on the grand tour around Europe where they would hit all the hot spots, you know, all the big capitals, and they'd hobnob with the other wealthy people and all that. Well, we didn't have all the great cathedrals of Europe, but then we have the great cathedrals of Yosemite and Yellowstone. We have natural wonders. And so Americans created an idea called See America First, where in order to understand yourself as an American in the early 20th century, you had to tour through the United States and see our country. And people would, and of course we still do, these big loop trips around the country to see all the big sites. So in addition to Yellowstone and Yosemite, when you were in California, Ramona's Marriage Place was like one of your big Western anchors. It was up there on the top 5 list, the top 10 list, with the Grand Canyon and everything else. So here's some of their postcards. So this is, the front side is Ramona's Marriage Place before restoration, and you can tell it's a pre-1907 card from the back. Lucy and I visited this place on the 11th inst, brought away a piece of tile from the roof. Read Ramona by Helen Hunt Jackson. This is a tourist who came there when the house was basically abandoned, and in those days, that's how Spreckles knew this was going to be a moneymaker. People were carving their initials in the doorposts, they were taking tiles, they were taking souvenirs, they were stripping the property to take souvenirs home before they could buy them, you know, legally. Here's another one, it's a little hard to read. It's also, it's 1907, so it's before restoration. It says, I suppose you have read about this. Everybody knew about it. And here, this is December 1910, so it's just been open to the public. This is where the story Ramona was placed, just being restored and kept in order. So people are all visiting it and they're all talking about it. And then they show you, and I found, I think I have, I don't know, somewhere like 10 or 12 photo albums. All this junk is on eBay. 10 or 12 different photo albums from people's tours, those big loop tours that they made around the country, stopping at Ramona's Marriage Place. So here's Bertie, Marion, and Gert, who traveled from Illinois around the country, and there's their car, and they're doing all the thing, and they're taking pictures. Here they are in the Arizona desert, there's their car. Here they are with their car, going through the drive-through tree. And here they are at Ramona's Marriage Place. Ramona's Marriage Place, the fountain, Ramona's Marriage Place, the courtyard. It was as big of a deal as the drive-through tree. This is one of my favorite ones. This is the honeymoon album of these two people, Ruby Faye and Lauren Dents. They were married in Texas in 1941, and they drove on their honeymoon to San Diego. and they marked things like, there's Lauren at the Continental Divide. I prefer our 37 Dodge. Ruby Faye made this great album of the whole trip, and here she's saying, so here they go, they visit Hollywood, the Chinese theater, all the stuff we know, and here's their little photo booth photos, and she writes, 2 moving stars. It's just so adorable. And here, so they go out, and she writes, the crooner sang yours. It's her honeymoon, right? Everything is romantic because it's her honeymoon. It's very, very sweet. Of course they went to Ramona's marriage place, and there they got their honeymoon bond. Because of course everyone needs one of those. It's a proclamation from Ramona's marriage place. You could actually get married at Ramona's marriage place. There was a chapel, and you could get married at the chapel. And you brought in your own officiant, so it could be whatever denomination you wanted it to be. And they held weddings there until the 1960s. You could still get married there. So there are several pages in Ruby Faye's album devoted to Ramona's marriage place. This is the big spread. So you can see she pasted in commercial postcards, as well as brochures about the place in San Diego, and then some pictures. There's Lauren, there's Ruby Faye at the fountain. That's in front of the house. That's the bag from the souvenir that she bought in the curio shop. She saved the bag, and she wrote on it that she bought a redwood toothpick holder. I don't have one of those, but I want. Then here she wrote here, that's the wishing well. The wishing well was not an original feature of the home, and it's gone now. But it was a big deal at Ramona's marriage place, and she wrote, the wishing well is nearly full of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. I made a wish too, but I won't tell. Isn't that sweet? It's just, so we can think about this, and we can see things a little bit differently. People like Ruby Faye and her husband Lauren are weaving their reflections on a novel that they had read into their real experiences in the landscape that they recognized from the book in real Southern California, right? They're visiting places familiar from fiction that are real places made meaningful first in fantasy rather than in fact, but all of our lives are full of imagination and fantasy, right? So think about this. Instead of thinking of these tourists all as zombie dupes or something, what if we think about how this happens in all of our lives? Like, anyone seen Field of Dreams? That's not a chick flick. It's a baseball movie. And there was actually, so they went to shoot this movie, and the location scouts found a farm, because it takes place on a farm that has a baseball diamond on it. They found this very quaint farm in Iowa, and they go to the farmer and they said, hey, can we rent your house and your farm for this movie we're gonna shoot? What we wanna do is we're gonna mow down part of your cornfield and build a baseball diamond, and then we're done shooting, you can have the cornfield back and everything, it'll be fine. Okay, no problem. Well, the movie became a huge big deal, and after the movie, tourists flocked to see the fake baseball diamond on the movie set. So much so that it is a touristable attraction with a curio shop. And eventually the farming family who lived there, they were like, this isn't working out so well. Kind of like the Del Valles at Rancho Pamulos. It's not working out so well. So they turned the property into a 501c3, they moved away. And it's there as a museum, open to the public. People have buried the ashes of their children underneath home plate. It's not, that is not superficial, please, right? Because baseball meant something to a father and a son, and they were connected to the movie, and so they were connected to the place that is just a set, but it's totally recognizable from the film. Lord of the Rings? So my friend Ian Brody wrote the location guidebook. It even has like where the porta potties were. And we can all make jokes about people who really think they're traveling to Middle Earth when they go to New Zealand, but we know that it's just New Zealand. Nevertheless, people love going to see so that's a set that was built, right? And they had to rebuild the set so that it'd be more enduring, so it wouldn't just be temporary because so many people wanted to visit it. It's been booming tourism in New Zealand because of all the books, because of the movies primarily. It's been a really, really big deal. It's the same phenomenon, or for that matter, Harry Potter, right? So in the Harry Potter books and movies, there's the real King's Cross train station in London, which is a real train station. But to go to Hogwarts, you have to leave from platform 9 3/4. Well, you know, if you've been to a train station before, you know that there's a 9 and there's a 10. There's not a 9 3/4. They got so many requests for 9 3/4, they built one. Now there's a 9 3/4, so that you can see it when you want to visit King's Cross because of Harry Potter. And of course there's a gift shop. So, same with Ramona. Here is a postcard from about 1905 of Ramona's bedroom, and who wouldn't want that? I mean, really. So, we all do this, right? It's not just them back then that did that in silly Southern California. It's all of us everywhere. So at the Estudillo house, back in Ramona's marriage place, back in San Diego, after stripping the name Ramona's marriage place and taking away the connection with Ramona for decades, it was taken away in the 60s, a few years, I published my book in 2005, and a couple of years later they contacted me. They were going to do a new exhibit that talked about the Ramona-connected history of the building. And so they made this new exhibit. They now built it out even more. And it's beautifully done. And they realized that it was the novel that saved the house. Because before, remember when people were stealing the tiles from the roof, it was a mud melting adobe. It was about to vanish, right? It was about to vanish into nothing. If not for all that tourism, it's possible that all of Old Town would have just, melted away. So we can see, this is the tourist edition of the novel, so we can see how compelling our works of fiction are in our world, and how our world, our landscapes, are always made of a complex tapestry of fiction and fantasy as well as fact and reality. And our lives are that much richer when all those things intertwine. So thank you very much. I want to invite you all to come up and look at a selection of books that I brought, and I'll introduce you to them really quick, and then I'll take some questions. So you may be interested in a first edition of the novel. They're very difficult to find, and they're even more difficult to identify. I've never tried, because it's almost impossible. The early editions all have the artichoke cover, and there's one really important tell that comes very, very early on after the book is published in 1885. There was appended to the text a little article in the back called Ramona's Home that's written about Rancho Cumulos. So if you have the Ramona's Home text, you don't have a first edition, you have a much later one. But like this version of the novel, this is not a first edition, and it has several little ads about Helen Hunt Jackson's other books, but it doesn't have the Home of Ramona thing in it. But these other copies of the artichoke cover in different colors, they all do have it. And there's lovely things like, here's the Home of Ramona pasted on the inside, and then the owner of the book describes a visit to Jackson's grave in Colorado. Here's the tourist edition, and this one also has, this is really nice, which is inscribed to a woman in honor of her granddaughter, who is named Ramona. I've met quite a few women named Ramona. You'll see different colors, different covers. There are two really interesting ones with illustrations. This is the 2-volume Monterey edition. Some of the Monterey editions don't have the elaborate little floral thing, they're just blue. The Monterey edition has illustrations by Henry Sandham, and Sandham traveled with Helen Hunt Jackson in California when she was writing articles for the Century magazine before she wrote the book. And some people have gotten confused because he later illustrated the book. And so they have gotten confused that he was with her illustrating a book when she was in California. She was already planning the book, but she wasn't. She hadn't thought of the book yet. That's documented in her letters later. So he was with her. She was doing travel articles and work on behalf of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but she wasn't doing research for a book. But his illustrations are in here, and they're really pretty drawings. And then there's also another edition that's illustrated by N.C. Wyeth, and so those are also really beautiful. Yeah, so that's kind of classy. A couple of other ones. The Limited Editions Club did a really nice version of it with an introduction by J. Frank Dobie. That's really neat. The novel, it's still in print because of course it's out of copyright, so it's free to do it. This is the trashy romance novel version. This is one of the current ones, the classy scholarly version, or the audiobook on little cassette. It was required reading in schools in California and other places. So these are editions of the novel that wrap around, and these are the school book editions, the textbook editions, various ones of those. There's a couple books over here facing this way. This is Jackson's original book, A Century of Dishonor, that started her Indian research, still in print today. And then a couple of other books that she wrote, these are compilations that were published posthumously of her work, of her travel writing about Southern California. And then these are the books about, the novel, the tour guide books. I didn't talk about the real Ramona. There were like 6 different women identified, so some of that is in here. There's a lot of good phony, misinformation in here. So please come and share these in a moment. And then I have copies of my book, which is all about the stuff that I just shared with you. So I sell those at cost, and I'm happy to sign them. So we can do that. But I want to make sure that I leave time for you to ask me questions.
One over here. Well, over there first.
Okay.
And then
Who owns the copyright, or does it?
No copyright.
No copyright.
Nope,
1885.
no,
No copyright.
expired.
1884. No
But
copyright.
who did originally, the publisher?
Little Brown. No, William Sharpless Jackson, her husband, controlled the copyright for quite a long time. And there's still, I just met some of her descendants. She had no living children, but there are descendants through a niece. And I just met some of them a couple of weeks ago. But they don't have the copyright anymore because it's out. Yeah.
Did her husband go with her on the trips too?
No, he didn't travel with her at all. He lived in Colorado, and he didn't travel with her. He came later and saw the Ramona pageant, and he saw he visited some of the Ramona sites that his wife had made so famous, but that was after she died. You had a question?
Can you recommend a biography of Mrs. Jackson?
Kate Phillips wrote a really beautiful literary biography of Jackson. There's one from the 1930s that's kind of interesting, but Kate Phillips's book about Helen Hunt Jackson, published in about, like 2003 or some, in the 2000s anyways. It's beautifully done book. It's extremely thoughtful. She wrote about a lot of her letters. There's another scholar, Valerie Shearer Mathis, who's done a lot of work with Jackson's letters and all about Jackson's work to help Native Americans. So, and about the other women who followed in Jackson's footsteps, inspired by her, in her life and after she died. So Valerie Mathis is all she wrote. Val wrote the introduction to this edition of Ramona, for example. So she wrote quite a bit of stuff about Jackson, but the best biography is Kate Phillips. Yeah.
Two-parter. Can you tell us more about her bio? I imagine you don't become a special agent in the Bureau of Indian Affairs easily.
She had a lot of connections.
Yeah, and how did she get into the advocacy business?
She was inspired by, well, first of all, so she had been married, and her first marriage, and had children who died. And you know, this is not unusual in the 19th century, but it's always tragic, and it was deeply felt. And she went into a deep period of mourning. Her husband also died. He was killed in a submarine accident. Yeah, he developed a submarine about the Civil War, after the Civil War. And so it was experimental, and he died. So she had experienced a great deal of loss, and from her loss, she went into poetry and developed her writing skills, and then she expanded them into travel writing and became, I mean, she had an incredible talent for it, and she became really well known, and so she hung out in all the big hip literary circles, and she knew everybody who was everybody who was anybody. She was hired by all the top magazines, published in all the top magazines, was paid extremely well. She was one of the highest paid authors of the period, men or women. She often wrote under different pseudonyms so that it wouldn't be clear that she was a woman. And so her most common pseudonym was simply H.H. for Helen Hunt, because that was her first husband's name. Helen Maria Fisk Hunt Jackson is her full name. Her father was a minister in Amherst. So eventually she met a Western banker called William Sharpless Jackson and married him and moved to Colorado Springs. But she saw back east, she saw a presentation given by Chief Standing Bearer of the Poncas tribe about what was happening to them in the east, and she was just stricken with outrage about what was happening. And she had previously really disdained middle-class and wealthy white women who took on a cause. She actually wrote a letter where she said, "I have become the most odious thing, a woman with a hobby." That's what she said of herself. And so it was her passion for the rest of her life to advocate for Native Americans. And so then she just used all of her skill and all of her connections to do everything that she possibly could for the rest of her life. Everything after that was all devoted to her Native American work. Yeah.
Did she know Loomis here?
No, Lummis came later. He walked to California, but he hadn't walked here yet.
Like 1900?
Yeah, he came just a little bit after she died, so
Oh, okay.
they didn't meet. She also didn't meet Harrison Gray Otis. She was very close friends with Abbot Kinney, you know, of Venice, the developer of Venice.
Yeah, she
Really,
did, too.
and who lived at Kinniloa. She stayed with him at Kinniloa, and she appointed him her co-commissioner. When she was appointed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to be a special commissioner to study the needs and the conditions of the Mission Indians, and she appointed Abbot Kinney to work with her, so they traveled together, because of course it's really a bad deal for a woman to be traveling alone in the rural outback. You know, she was going to seriously remote places. So she did most of that travel with Abbot Kinney. And often also with the illustrator Henry Sandman. They traveled, sometimes the three of them together for days or weeks at a time to do this research for her fact-based work on Native Americans. Yeah.
Did she ever write a book about travel in Europe?
She did. Bits of travel. There's bits of travel on 3 coasts, and there's bits of travel at home. She published a lot of books. Mostly they were later collected editions of her articles. So even Ramona was first serialized in the Christian Union. It was not originally published as a book. It was the book was meant to come out after the serial. So first it appeared in the paper, in different editions, whatever, week by week. And then the book came out to make the maximum splash as opposed to the maximum cash. Yeah.
Speaking of travel magazines, the Auto Club was huge in developing tourism,
Yes.
but also kind of historically focused even at the time, I think. Did they buy into the myth to sell?
They were, yeah, so the Auto Club and the Good Roads movement were necessarily very deeply involved in tourism in Southern California. So getting people to Ramona identified locations, they worked very closely. There's a lot of correspondence in the pageant, the Ramona pageant archives. They worked very closely with the pageant staff to promote the pageant. The pageant is in Hemet. It's still hard to get to Hemet. And you can go 80 miles an hour now, not 40. So it was very hard to get to Hemet. There was never a train or a trolley that went to Hemet. You had to go by car, so they organized motor stages, i.e. buses, and personal private car trips to get to the pageants. There was a lot of collaboration with the Auto Club after 1923, because 1923, that's really just about the start time when automobiles became, everyone talks about the Model T, which is earlier, but for really reliable, easy to drive cars that everybody can just have and rely on to commute, it really happens more in the mid-1920s, right around 1923. So the pageant fit right in with the beginning of automobile tourism and with the development all across the country of much better roads. So not just rutted, muddy mess, but the beginning of macadam and then eventually asphalt and concrete pavement, brick pavement, so different kinds of paved surfaces that made hard surface roads easy to drive on.
We want to make sure there's time for folks to look at some of these materials, your collection. So we'll take one last question, Susan,
What
and we'll wrap up.
about the book that James Wharton James, how do you say his name?
George Wharton James,
George
through
Wharton James.
Ramona's country.
Yeah, but he wasn't, he was partly responsible with the Southwest Museum and so on.
Right, he was in Pasadena too.
Yeah, so why did he do this sort of book?
Well, so both George Wharton James and Charles Fletcher Lummis were very enchanted by the novel Ramona because everybody was. It wasn't weird. So Lummis published a beautiful small book illustrated with cyanotypes. It's very rare, called The Home of Ramona. And all the cyanotypes, so that's blueprinted photos. They're very fragile. You can't expose them to the light because they fade like mad. They're all photographs that he took at Rancho Camulos. And he was so enamored of Rancho Camulos and the Del Valle family that even though he was married, he wanted to marry one of the daughters. He was really into it. And of course founded the Landmarks Club and was one of the leaders of the preservation of the missions. And his house, he built like this little bell tower and all that. So he and George Wharton James were running neck and neck on this stuff, but pretty much everybody was. Harrison Gray Otis, his wife Eliza, was really, really into it. The first, the California Pavilion at the World Columbian Exposition in 1893 was shaped like a mission because they were all getting into this stuff. So it became the image that everybody put forward about Southern California. So it was enormously, enormously influential. And a lot of the commentators who write about, we think of Ramona now because it's a romance, as a girly book, a women's book, but a lot of the people who wrote about it in the period who wrote about it with a heart full of romance were all men. It was all people who were really compelled by this. It was men and women who were compelled by the story. And it is beautiful. If you read the opening chapters, the beautiful landscape of the rancho and the young Ramona and the romance of her and Alessandro, it's beautifully told. So it's not hard to understand why people became enamored of it in the way that we do when we read fiction.
And on that note, we'll wrap up, because again, I want you to have time to look at some of this stuff. her book, and they're in the back. She's going to be back there signing it and selling them if you're interested in checking one out. I know I'm getting one myself. So please join us for our next book club program, which is Monday, July 31st. And that's going to be at 5 p.m. It's a Zoom program by author, librarian, historian, bookseller, and book collector Michael Richards. He's actually zooming in from Australia for this presentation. It's titled A Maker of Books, Alec Bolton and his Brenda Bella Press. So you gotta check that out. You can register for that program online at bccbooks.org/programs or in any of the emails that you might be getting from us. So please come check out some of these books, handle with care, please. And then if you're interested in buying a book, those are in the back. Thank you, everyone.